So I went to watch Ballerina last Saturday, and I've gotta say, John Wick movies are going to shit.
That's impossible!
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
The John Wick franchise is dealing with what I like to call Fast and Furiousification. Each movie does its best to outdo the previous one, and in the process, the creators end up making the most ridiculous action sequences in hopes that people will be entertained enough to overlook the absurdity of them. It worked for a while with John Wick because Keanu Reeves was excellent in the role, the action scenes were entertaining enough, and fans were relatively invested in the story. However, the last two movies showed early cracks forming in the franchise's long-term future. The overly done action scenes like John Wick falling down the stairs for 100 years felt more like watching Kung Fu Panda than a dark, gritty action film. Now fast forward 2 years since John Wick 4 and you'll see me clamoring for a seat on a Saturday in this packed theater to watch the most forgettable action movie I've seen in a while. The cracks that showed up in the later John Wick movies are now giant rifts glaring at the audience. The crazy weapons, the laughably absurd action scenes, the lack of universe expansion, it was all on full display in this 2-hour slogfest. The movie relies heavily on cameos, a big-name actress, and action scenes to carry this generic dollar store garbage, and it still manages to fuck those things up too. The cameos feel like blatant fan service, the action scenes are trite and repetitive, and the main character is blander than 1950s American cuisine. Cool. Let's just quickly summarize the story for those who haven't seen it yet. The main character, Eve, witnessed her dad being killed by a group of cultists when she was a little girl. Apparently, the writers couldn't be bothered to give the cult any name because why bother expanding the universe when you have cameos in Ana De Armas to carry your movie? During the flashback to Eve's dad dying, we're introduced to the main antagonist known as the Chancellor, who won't be seen again until the last 30 minutes of the movie. Young Eve is then sent by Winston of all people to live at the New York branch of the Ruska Roma, where she's then trained to be an assassin. This is also where she learns to fight like a girl, or to use creative means to overcome a physically superior opponent.
You will always be weaker. You will always be smaller. You want to win? Improvise. Adapt. Cheat.
Despite the super cringe delivery, this could have been a defining theme in the story that causes our main character to be more resourceful in combat, but it ended up just being Disney-level pandering. It was cheap surface-level messaging that was contradicted every time Eve would perform insane feats of strength with arms that looked like Timothée Chalamet's. Not to mention, she had some crazier action scenes than John Wick, yet she never seemed to get injured. She didn't even have any blood on her face after blowing people up with grenades right in front of her. It's not until the final act, when she survives 4 grenades blowing up in the same room as her, that she finally gets a little cut on her eyebrow. Meanwhile, John Wick got stabbed, shot multiple times, hit by cars, thrown through glass cases, fell from the Continental, cut off his own finger, and fell down the stairs for 10 fucking hours. Of course, him surviving all that crap was pretty ridiculous in its own right, but at least they weren't afraid to show him getting bloodied and bruised. Apparently, Ana De Armas was even asking for them to make her look more disheveled, which just makes you wonder why the director was so concerned about making her look pretty if he wanted this movie to be empowering rather than sexualizing.
That phrase where, it's fight like a girl, we wanted that to come across as something like really empowering.
I think a lot of times you see it's overly sexualized, or it's there's not a realism to it, and I've always, it is important to me that it's approached from that, a female action thing can be labeled in a sort of it's like a woman is strong, like, to begin with.
Here's the transcript. I think a lot of times you see it's overly sexualized, or there's not a realism to it, and it is important to me that this was approached from a female perspective that can be labeled a woman is strong to begin with. I think there can be some kind of pandering in certain ways that I think is too far. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I understand the female perspective, just like women don't understand the male perspective, but it seems to me like Ana De Armas was giving you her perspective when telling you to make her look more disheveled, and the most most you'd allow was a couple of minor cuts on her face. It's shit like this that makes your message seem disingenuous, and most women are gonna read right through it. Anyway, Eve starts her career as an assassin for the Ruska Roma, and after a couple of months, she randomly gets attacked by our Kirkland brand cult. The director of the Ruska Roma orders Eve not to pursue them, but Eve disobeys and starts her revenge tour by checking into the New York Continental. While she's there, Winston tells Eve that there's a defector from the cult she's looking for that just so happens to be hiding at the Continental. Now remember when the John Wick movies made a huge deal about the consequences of conducting business on hotel property?
What have you done? Finished it. You killed a man on company grounds, Jonathan. You leave me no choice but to declare you excommunicado. The doors to any service or provider in connection with the Continental are now closed to you.
Apparently that doesn't apply to this cult because they just blatantly attack Norman Reedus on Continental grounds without any repercussions. Then we move on to Eve's obligatory weapons selection scene where the cult attacks her again, destroying part of the weapons shop. Now the weapons expert, who was initially reluctant to give her any information on the cult, has conveniently been given a reason to tell Eve that they're based in Hallstatt. So she travels to Austria and gets into fights throughout town on her way to confront the Chancellor. The Chancellor calls up the director of the Ruska Roma to deliver an ultimatum. Either she calls Eve off, or the two factions will erupt into all-out war. The director instead offers to hit John Wick up to finish her off. So John Wick teleports to Austria really quickly to confront Eve. They fight for a bit, John kicks her ass a few times, and then eventually lets her go to kill the Chancellor. Eve beats up more cannon fodder on her way to kill the Chancellor before finishing him off with John Wick's help. Then the creators shamelessly copy their own ending from John Wick 2 by showing a big contract going out on Eve, and that's where the story leaves off. Alright, now let's talk about it. The writing overall feels insanely half-assed. The whole "you killed my father, prepare to die" story has been done so many times that any writer still using it without updating it is more creatively bankrupt than Disney Star Wars. Mike White just used the same premise for a character in his latest season of The White Lotus, but it wasn't seen as cliche and unoriginal because he took the time to build upon the original foundation and not just copy and paste it. Using this same premise in a movie where the plot is already tertiary to action and characters, though, feels insanely lazy from someone whose job is literally to write original stories for the big screen. And I'm not expecting storytelling on par with White Lotus, but at least make it look like you put some effort into the writing, for Christ's sake. Even just the fact that John never deals with any consequences for defying the Ruska Roma and helping Eve kill the leader of the cult. The movie builds this cult up to seem incredibly dangerous and powerful, but they didn't give two shits that John Wick helped Eve kill their leader. This movie takes place between the third and fourth John Wick movies, so we should have seen something in the fourth movie that tells us that these events even take place to begin with. The main character also just feels underbaked, lacking any personality and the vengeful intensity that this role called for. Keanu Reeves was able to perfectly capture the brooding, cold, dark, intense nature that defined John Wick as a character. Ana De Armas, on the other hand, really struggles to deliver her own intensity as Eve, which only adds to her stale character. The ChatGPT-esque dialogue certainly doesn't help either, leaving the viewer feeling like there's nothing relatable about this cookie-cutter main character. But enough about all of that, let's talk about the biggest reason we all watch John Wick films to begin with, the action scenes. While this is definitely the movie's biggest strength, I can't help but notice some glaring issues throughout the movie. Just like the other John Wick movies, Ballerina's action is relatively entertaining when you just want to turn your brain off for a couple of hours, but the action scenes can overstay their welcome at times to the point where I found myself zoning out. And the more unique action sequences usually made me roll my eyes or just straight up laugh in the middle of the theater. There's a sequence where Eve and this bartender/assassin are literally just picking plates up off the ground and breaking them over each other's heads. Or another scene where Eve manages to not only wield a fire hose, but push forward into a flamethrower like an experienced firefighter. I'm not expecting her to look like Dolph Lundgren in Rocky IV, but a little definition in the arms to showcase the rigorous training her character went through really would have gone a long way. And in case you think I'm being too harsh on her physique, this is what Linda Hamilton looked like when she was in Terminator 2. Altogether though, Ballerina it ended up being a very forgettable, mediocre movie that definitely didn't live up to the name blockbuster. The John Wick movies will be able to entertain people for a little while longer, but by following the Fast and Furious movie formula, this franchise is desperately trying to compensate for the lack of originality with ridiculous action sequences that serve as desperate attempts to one-up the previous installment. And fans have clearly spoken by not even bothering to watch the film in the first place given its pathetic $51 million domestic box office opening. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.